Rabbi Peretz Teller, thank you for joining us. One of the biggest stories in the book of Numbers is the story of Bilam, who comes to curse the Jews. So maybe you could tell us how a non-Jewish prophet looks like, and how is it possible to have a prophet from the non-Jews? And why did God give us a prophecy that was given by somebody who wasn't even Jewish? So maybe you could answer some of these questions. Thank you.
So Klal Yisrael in Parshas Chukas, they're going through the Midbar and basically, like D9 bulldozer, they're bulldozing their way through the Midbar with Moshe Rabbeinu. They go to Sichon and Og, two kings. Okay, in Og is Melech Habashan. He's in the area of the Golan. Sichon is Melech Hamori. He's the king of the Amorites. And they go and basically say, we're just on our way to Eretz Israel. Please just don't mind us passing through. So Sichon goes and is them in war, and they wipe them out in a miraculous way. Remember, Sichon is a giant, Og is a giant. They're wiping out these giants, just destroying these people completely. When that happens, that's tone for Parshas Balak, because Balak basically sees, and it's interesting how he sees this, I'll get into that, but he sees that Klal Yisrael is a literal military powerhouse wiping out, but not in the normal way. They're wiping out through miracles, through Nisim v'Niflois. They're just destroying anyone who stands up against them. So that sets the stage, Vayar Balak, that Balak saw. Now, it's interesting because the question is, what does he see and how does he see it? So it turns out that he's Ben Sipor. He's Balak, the son of the bird. Now, it's a very interesting name. That's probably not his real name. But why do they call him the son of the bird? And the Orach Chaim says that he basically, there's a certain bird that's very well known, and he uses this bird as kishuf, as magic. And the bird tells him things that people can't see, like prophecy or certain visions of actual happenings, future happenings. And he's called the son of the bird because the bird itself is like his general, like his commander. And he tells him future things that happens. So he tells Balak that Sichon was wiped out, and he shows him the visions of Klal Yisrael destroying the Amorites. And he also sees Og being, and he also sees that they're coming that in his path. And this frightens. And also the people of Moab, it says V'yakatz Moab. What does it mean, V'yakatz? It's an interesting language. It's a thorn. This concept of coats is a thorn. And Vayakatz Moab, it's like a thorn in their hearts with fear, cutting, digging into them. But there's another idea behind the coats, which is Vayikutsu mipnei bnei Israel. Back in Shemos, in Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, they were also had this thorn. So why is it Vayakatz Moab mipnei Israel? Because there's this concept of a coats in the eye. The thorn in one eye basically is that it hurts them to see the Jewish people. So they see Klal Yisrael being so successful and multiplying, pruvu, that they're paros harabos, that they multiply throughout the land. This hurts them as if a thorn is sticking in their eye. So it's something very important, because we see this language by both Moab, and we also see this language by the Mitzrim. So what's the connection? The connection is that your non-Jewish neighbor, okay, he may not go out and say to you, do you realize seeing you is like a sting in my eye, just watching you? He's not going to say that, because it's not safe for him to say that. It's harassment, there are laws, there's certain issues. But in a safe place, he will say that. And that's what we're seeing online. The online phenomenon that we see today is because a safe space has been opened up, and people think mistakenly that this is a new phenomenon. But it's really not a new phenomenon, because it's part of the genetic makeup of the non-Jew that Curtis Silver himself said this. And it's very interesting because he happens to have biologically Jewish children, even though he's not Jewish. He has biologically Jewish children And he himself said he has to stop himself from attacking his own children. It's in the genetic. He's warned us about this. And he was telling people, how to vote, whatever. The point of it is someone like that who's explaining this concept that even seeing you is like a thorn in their eye. It's a very important concept to relate and say, well, my neighbor, he smiles to me. He's smiling to you on the outside, but on the inside, you are a thorn in his eye. And that's the idea of Bilam. Bilam, it says, was Shesum Ha'ayin. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin in Kuf Hey Aman Aleph 105a says that he was blind in one eye. So it's interesting because it's anyone in Zechariah, actually, it says in the Navi that anyone who goes and tries to Pogea in Klal Yisrael is like Pogea in the Babas Eno, that in the eye of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's like they're poking the eye of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we have to understand this mashal, know that God doesn't have a body, right? Eno guf, v'lo masige yasige aguf. This is one of the ikarim of the Rambam, that God doesn't have a body. So he doesn't have a physical form. He doesn't have an eye. So what does it mean poking out the eye of Hashem? It means that Hashem's hashgacha is on Klal Yisrael. He's always watching us. He's watching over us. So whenever the non-Jews or anybody else tries to pogea Ba'am Yisrael, it's as if they're poking the eye of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're interrupting his natural hashgacha and protection of the Jewish people. So therefore, it says Mida Keneged Mida, he became what's called Shesum Ha'ayin, that he was blind in his eye. What does it mean he was blind in his eye? It doesn't mean just being blind. What it means is he's lost his Seichel Yashar. He's lost his ability to make decisions. When do we see this? We see that Moab hires this Nesich Midian, this prince of Midian, to be melech over them. They have such fear that even though they fight like, let's say, two dogs, Moab is fighting with Midian. They're warring each other. They made peace because of the threat of the Jewish people. But Midian itself is very far south. If we look at the map, we'd see that Midian is more like, let's say, the Aqaba, Jordan region of today is where Midian is. But Moab is basically across from Jericho, from Jericho. Moab is the direct line between the Jewish people's camp and Eretz Israel. So what is it? Why is Moab necessarily reacting? Because they are the ones that are really in the line of the bulldozer. They are in the line of the greatest military powerhouse, the one that Hashem made the sea split for, that they wiped out Amalek except for the weak ones. No one was able to stand up to Klal Yisrael at that moment militarily. So now they're right in the way of the bulldozer. So they have fear. They're going and saying, okay, we better make up, with Midian in order to, because why? Midian itself hosted Moshe. So they figured, Yisro and Midian was the place where Moshe grew outside of Mitzrayim. Therefore, they know his secret. So they hire this. They say, please be king over us. This Nesich, this prince of Midian, known as Balak. Okay. So they hire him and they say, okay, please help us, take care of this menace. So Balak, who from his earlier days was told he's going to be king by Bilam, and Bilam was one of these, to answer your earlier question, why was the non-Jews given prophecy? So it's interesting because we have a number of prophets by the Jewish people. One of them was Lavan, that Hashem told, Isham Elecha, Midaber im Yaakov, Tov ad Ra. So we're not allowed to talk to Yaakov in the Parshas Vayishlach. At the end of Vayetze, going into Parshas Vayishlach, he meets Lavan on his way out of Chutz La'aretz, going into Eretz Yisrael. Lavan chases him. That was Harami Ovid Avi that we say in the Pesach Haggadah. That's the story of Lavan chasing Yaakov to completely destroy him. And Hashem says to him, don't say anything good to him, and don't say anything bad. That was a nevuah. That was prophecy at night. So we see that the Goyim not only had Bilam, but they also had Lavan. And that's the prophecy. And also Avimelech. Avimelech was also given a prophecy not to touch Sarah. So Belila, again, Belila means at night in Tuma, that Hashem doesn't come to the Nevi'as Ulmus Ha'olam, the Goyish or non-Jewish prophets by day. He only comes to them kind of like sneaking around at night because they are Mali Tuma and they cannot take the prophecy and use it. They use it properly to bring tshuva. One of the tainas that the Umas Olam would say they didn't have a Bilam is that if we had had a like your Moshe or your prophets throughout the ages, Eliyahu and Navi, and all the other prophets that we had, we would have we would have been good, just like you. So in order to take Pischon Peh, that to say you're not, that's not true. Why? Because you had Bilam. Because lo kam b'Yisrael kamoshe od, aval ba'umas ha'olam kam. We say every morning, Yigdal Elohim chai v'yishtabach. In that, we say, lo kam b'Yisrael kamoshe. No one has ever arisen as great a prophet as Moshe. But the drasha is, in the nations, one who is great as Moshe, or even greater in prophecy, did arise. And who was that? That was Bilam HaRasha. And what did Bilam do? See, he said, I'm going to take this prophecy and curse the Jewish people. Balak sent a delegation and said that, he grew up in Midian. And Midian answered, said, what are we going to do here? They said, well, his mouth is the power of the Jewish people is through their prayer and through their tefillah, through their mitzvos, their spoken words of Torah. So that is their power. That's the source. So Balak remembers that he's going to be king by the non-Jewish prophet Bilam. He sends a whole nation to Bilam to bring him to curse the Jewish people. So now things start developing within the Parsha. And he sends this delegation. Midian comes together with their magic, with their kishufim and kesem, right? Their magical instruments. And also the Sarei Moav come, okay? The officers of Moav. So together they come, and he says, wait here, and I will tell you what Hashem says to me, so stay the night. So Midian says, if that's the case, that means he's nobody. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's not for real. And they leave. So Midian is out of the equation for the time being. They will come in later. And it's important how they come in and why they come in. But Bilam, he is a very physical person, Bilam. He is someone who is alive with all kinds of depravities. Okay, he's alive with bestiality. He's involved with. He's not the type of pure kadosh person you would think of who is zoicha to get nevuah. So why did Hashem give him nevuah? The answer is because we needed a pischon peh. They shouldn't have a pischon peh, an opening to say that had we had a prophet. Look at the prophet Bilam. Look what he did. He took that nevuah, and Hashem said to him, it says that right? He said, don't go with the Sari Bilam. So Bilam, it's interesting, Hashem said, who are these people with you? He starts off, very, very soft, Hashem. Very interesting. He says, who are these people with you? So when Bilam heard this, and this is part of being Shesum Ha'ayin, this is when a person is so and such a rasha that Hashem makes him blind thoughts. And he thinks, it must be that Hashem doesn't. If Hashem is asking me, who are these people? It must be that he's not aware. If he's not aware, then there is a time where I can curse the Jewish people and use that, called a roiga, that rega of zam, and I will use it to curse the Jewish people. So that he tries to do, it's interesting, because Hashem says, Lo selechem hem. So Bilam, what is he? This is something that we, unfortunately, when we're not thinking straight, we think, Hashem, why? Because I'm matzliach in chutzlaretz. I have wealth, or I have, beautiful life here in chutzlaretz. So therefore, Hashem obviously loves me. Well, look at the love that he gave Bilam. He said to Bilam, Lo Selech, says, that means I'm an old man. He doesn't want me to go on the road. He wants me to just curse them right here. So I'll curse them right here. He says, Lo Soras Am. Hashem said, no, you don't curse them. So what did Bilam say? He said, Avarchem, I'll give them a bracha. So Bilam thinks, thought pattern is so as twisted as his nature. He thinks that at first Hashem can't know or doesn't know who these Sarim of Moab are. And then he thinks, oh, so you don't want me to go with them, so I'll curse them right here. You don't want me to go, rough it on the road. And then he says, oh, you don't want me to curse them. And he says, okay, I'll bless. So what's the problem with blessing them? The interesting thing is, if we remember by Lovin, Hashem said, mitov ad ra, that he's not allowed to say anything good or bad. Because when someone gives you that bracha, it's actually from a Russia like Lovin or Bilam, that actually is a curse. That actually is going to turn upside down and not be good for you. So this he says, Hashem says, no, ki vorach, the nation is blessed. It doesn't need your blessing. So now Bilam doesn't know what to do here because he's obviously torn. He's desperate. Every fiber of his being wants to curse the Jewish people and destroy them. So now Hashem says, no, you can't go with them. You can't curse them. And you can't give them a bracha either. So now he's really torn. And what happens is he's a little bit mechutzev. So the Gemara, interestingly, says that Gemara we talked about in 105a, Kufay and Aleph, says that chutzpah helps kalape mala. So Bilam was mechutzev. Says, I want to go with them. So Hashem says, kum lechitam. So that's really an interesting problem here. First, Hashem says not to go with them, and then he says, kum lechitam. So what's happening? And the answer is he did it to trick Bilam, because b'derech rotelelech molichanoso. So a person who wants to go on a path, he will find that path. And that's where people who don't understand the concept of Torah and mitzvahs in general don't understand the relationship between chutzlarts, being matzliach and chutzlarts, because Hashem is saying, kum lechitam, go, I know you want to do this, so now I'm telling you, go ahead, go do this. Your real ratzon is neged my ratzon, but I'm telling you in a nevuah to go against my ratzon. Why? The answer, Bilam's eye, again, he see with more than one eye. So his ability to understand things is very perverted, just like he is perverted. So Hashem sends him on this path that he wants to go on in order to destroy him. Because at a certain point, a person gets clarity or vision that he should be or wants to see success in what he's doing. And in that success is his destruction. So people who have successful lives outside the land of Eretz Israel should know that there's no bracha in it, adeyad, that the future, for example, what today, people don't know this or might not know this, or what today is the Chachmei, Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin being used for. What is it being used for? Star Hotel. That's what it's being used for. So what was it? Its great legends were the great Chachamim of Europe used to sit and learn in its halls, and the Kedusha was reverberating throughout with the Divrei Torah. But because it's set up in Chutz La'aretz, it had no kiyum. It has no end, meaning it cannot survive long term. It's only a term, stop on the road of this long, long exile. So we have to understand that being matzliach outside the land does not mean that is a permanent bracha. Say after Shabbos, v'yitain lecha, all of those brachos, if we focus on them, are all inside Eretz Yisrael. So back to our parsha, we see that Bilam thinks he's being matzliach, and in the end, he is matzliach in a certain way. He brings 24,000 Jews down with his perversions. And how did he do this? He gave the Eitzah. And he gave the Eitzah to not only Midian, but also Moab and Midian together. So the interesting thing is that we know the Maisa, I don't know if I have to go into it too much, but Klal Yisrael get tricked by the Midianites and the Moabites, and they go and they worship Avodah Zarah. Okay, they do Baal Peor, they worship the Baal Peor. So how is that trick that happened? The interesting thing is there are a couple of versions, basically, what happened there. But all of the versions seem to indicate that there was trickery, that the Benos Moab and the Benos Midian, the daughters of Moab and Midian, tricked the Jewish people. First, they didn't give them water and they didn't give them food. Instead, they went in to buy, and instead they bought, they said, no, 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 you don't have to buy. We're friends here. You can go, drink this wine. Why don't you sit down and have some wine? And they gave, and that was before we had, Kuf Chaf Gimel in Yordea to tell us not to drink wine with the non-Jews. Because back then, the interesting thing is they didn't have a prohibition of drinking wine with non-Jews, and therefore we see what happened. After they drank, they were told, okay, that certain, whatever the point was, is that they drew them closer, and as they drew closer, their tivus nashim went, and therefore they were tricked into what they thought was a denigration of this idol, and instead it turned out served. But either way, there was trickery involved, and the point is that Moab and Midian and even Ammon together were all part of this. They were all part of this trickery that brought down, in later on we'll see how it brought them down, but they destroyed 24,000 Jews with this trickery. Gave this Eitzah. So the question that really, really begs to be answered is, we see by Parshas Pinchas that we're given a commandment, Surah Midyani, that we go, and we're now, Pinchas goes and it says, V'kam Pinchas mitocha Eda. Where was he sitting? It says he got up, right? Must have been sitting. He was sitting in the Sanhedrin. So Pinchas was a member of the Sanhedrin. He gets up and he remembers the halacha that Moshe forgets, which is Habol Aramis Kanayim Pogimbo, that if a person, it has to be B'shas Maisa, that at the exact moment, he's allowed to kill him if he's having relations with you. And in that time, was that particular halacha, he got up himself, which is interesting because we see that in a case where there's no other shoter, the shofet himself has to carry out the din. And he has to go to milchama, a certain thing that we have to understand about halacha, which is halacha is not meant to be learned and not performed. Halacha is meant to be acted upon, ma'isa mitzvah. And this is the example of Pinchas, who learned the halacha of Boil Aramis Kanayim Pogimbo. He learned that halacha, and he also fulfilled and executed the halacha itself. That's a very important point, that Limud HaTorah is not meant to just be learned. We don't learn 86 times in Kriyas HaTorah and throughout the Chumash that v'yirashta v'yashavta ba, v'arashta mitzaretz v'shavta ba. We don't learn this mitzvah just by saying it. We learn it by doing it. We learn it by rearranging our lives in Chutz La'aretz in order to come back to Eretz Yisrael. And if we're in Eretz Yisrael, we strengthen ourselves to rebuilding the Mikdash. This is our tachlis, this is our purpose. And we bring Mashiach through these actions, not by just learning the words and speaking them. So back to our parsha, Moab is involved through fear, but Midian is out of the way. So what are they doing there? So the interesting thing about why they got a commandment to attack the Midyanim, but they did not get a commandment to attack Moab. As a matter of fact, it says, Al tisgar bam. You're not allowed to go and make milchama, war with Moab. So there's a couple of reasons. As the first reason is that Rus and Nama are going to come from Moab and Ammon, their future Gioris. You cannot destroy Moab and Ammon because of these two Gerim that are going to come later. And of course, Rus, Moavia, and the mother of Rechavam, the wife of Shlomo, very critical people in Klal Yisrael, and therefore Moab and Ammon must be spared. But there's another aspect to it, which is we know that a Moavi, Va'amoni, Lo Yavo Israel, that they're not allowed to come into Klal Yisrael. So the Klei Yakar is really perplexed at the reason, because the reason brought down is they didn't give us bread and water in the midbar. So you would think, they're not nice. So that's it, finished. You're not part of the Jewish people. We're, Baishanim, uh, Rachmanim, Begomli Chassid. We're good people. And that's the sign of the Jewish people. So if you're like that you wouldn't give a starving person who's coming on the road bread, therefore you're not part of the Jewish people. The Klei Yakar says no. He says that's not enough. What was it that made it Moavi forever and ever, and an Ammoni cannot come into the Jewish people? The answer is because they were involved in the trickery of Baal Peor. They were involved in a spiritual assassination of the Jewish people, a trickery, something that brought us down, Machdias Arabim. And Machdias Arabim, it says, gets no chelik in Olam Haba, and therefore, when it comes to and the water, he says, Zet Tali Bazet. The reason that they were not allowed into the Jewish people forever and ever, we don't accept male converts from Ammon and Moab, is not just only because they didn't give us bread and water, but instead they gave us the wine. And after the wine, they enticed us to do avodah zarah, to do idol worship. And that combination is the reason, and the Klei Yakar brings that down very interestingly. So the last part, Rashi says another reason, by the way, of why we were told to make war with Midian and not with Moab. And another reason, sorry if I'll jump around here, but the other reason brought down by the Klei Yakar is that Midian sent Kazbi Batsor. She was the daughter of what were called Sor, but Sor is actually Balak. So it's interestingly says that Sor is Balak, and this prince, okay, was most honored in the house of Moab. She's daughter of the king, was sent to go marry Elazar, Moshe Rabbeinu, or Elazar, meaning the most chashiv, in one of the greatest spiritual assassination attempts of all time. She was there to Moshe or Elazar, the Kohen Gadol, into Znus, in body, and she was sent by Midian. And it's also understood that Benos Midian were involved. In other words, they went out to the Jewish people to entice them. Moab did not go out to the Jewish people, and therefore Moab was spared, and the commandment to destroy the Jewish people, to destroy Chas v'shalom, the Midianites, that was because they went out of their way. But Rashi says not only their way, but they weren't involved. And because they were a side story to this, they weren't affected by Moab being bulldozed, but rather they were southern and not involved, and they ended up being involved. That was the reason which is similar to the Klei Yakar. That's the reason why we commandment to go to war against Midian, but not against Moab. So the overall here in general, just to summarize, is that we have Vayakutsu Vayakatz Moab, that the non-Jew, when he sees you, just because he's not screaming at you today, it's only because he doesn't have a safe space to do so. But your very presence is like a thorn in his eye. And that's what we learn from Moab. We also learned that when a nation cannot physically destroy Klal Yisrael, that they will try other ways as well. That's what we see by Fatah, who knows militarily they can't stand up to Klal Yisrael, so instead they try various, techniques to United Nations, and of course the UN is glad to help them in that area with the Alilas Dam, blood libels. All of that is part of the strategy that we saw before. We've just seen it again. Ein tachas, ein chadet, there's nothing new under the sun. And we see that Bilam is the Navi for the Umas Olam, but you see that he wasn't thinking straight simply because when you are neged Ratzon Hashem, when you're going to attack Klal Yisrael, that's like attacking the eye of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, poking the eye, and therefore Mida Keneged Mida, their Seichel Yashar, as we saw by Iran Seichel Yashar, when they conducted the war, was completely off balance, attacking all of the Middle East and everybody in between even Turkey. They just made war with everyone instead of Klal Yisrael, which was a complete lack of Seichel Yashar. It's like Hashem took away their ability to see. And that's the concept behind Shesuma Ayin, that when the nations go and attack Klal Yisrael, Hashem blinds their seichel, blinds their intelligence, and makes them fall directly into the Pach HaMavis. And that's what we see by Bilam, who ends up being wiped out by Klal Yisrael in the war against Midian.